The snow came down in thick, heavy flakes, coating the streets in a layer of slush that made driving a nightmare. I was cold, tired, and ready to end my shift. Just one more delivery, I told myself. One more and I could go home, kick off my wet shoes, and curl up under a blanket. The order came in, a delivery to an address on the far edge of town, tucked away near the woods. The instructions were strange. Use the side door. Front gate will be locked. I read it twice, feeling a flicker of unease. I'd had odd requests before, people asking me to leave food in weird places or call them upon arrival. But something about this one felt off. Still, it was late, and I just wanted to be done. I accepted the order, hit the route button, and drove into the snowy night. The roads leading out of town were empty, save for the occasional street lamp casting a pale glow on the snow-covered asphalt. My car's tires crunched through the slush, and the windshield wipers worked overtime, struggling to keep the view clear. When I turned down the final street, the houses became fewer and farther apart. Trees lined the road, their branches heavy with snow. There were no other cars, no signs of life, just the quiet hum of the engine and the relentless snowfall. Finally, I spotted the address. It was an older house, nestled back from the road, with a tall fence wrapping around the property. No lights shone from the windows, except for a dim glow near the side door. I hesitated for a moment, gripping the steering wheel tighter. The whole place felt too quiet, too still. But I reminded myself that people had their quirks. Maybe they liked keeping things dark. Maybe they just wanted privacy. I grabbed the food bag from the passenger seat, took a deep breath, and stepped out into the cold. The snow crunched under my boots as I made my way to the side entrance, the only light guiding my path. The cold wind bit at my face, and my breath came out in short, visible bursts. I shifted the food bag in my hands, hoping to drop it off quickly and be on my way. Just as I reached the door, it swung open. A man stood in the doorway, smiling. But something about that smile didn't sit right with me. It felt too tight, too forced, as if he had rehearsed it. "Come inside," he said, his voice smooth but unsettling. "I've got a tip for you." Every instinct in my body screamed at me to stay outside. I held out the food instead, forcing a polite smile onto my face. "No need. You can tip through the app," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. The man's smile faltered for a fraction of a second before tightening again. Then I saw it. Movement behind him, just out of sight. A second figure shifted in the shadows and a glint of metal caught my eye. Fear prickled at the back of my neck. Whatever was happening here, I needed to get out. I took a step back, my heart hammering in my chest. "I'll just leave this here," I said, setting the food bag on the doorstep. The man's smile stretched wider, and he took a step closer. No. Come inside. It'll only take a minute." I shook my head, forcing my feet to move. "Thanks, but I really have to go." His expression darkened, and just as I turned toward my car, I heard the side gate creak open behind me. The man's voice followed, sharper and more insistent. "Hey, come back here!" Panic surged through me. I didn't look back. I didn't want to see what was behind that gate. I sprinted through the snow, my boots slipping on the icy path, my breath burning in my throat. When I reached my car, I fumbled with the door handle, my hands shaking. The wind howled around me, carrying the man's voice as he called after me, closer now. I threw myself into the driver's seat and slammed the door shut, locking it just as the headlights flicked on. That's when I saw him, the second figure, now fully visible. He wore a mask, and in his hand he held a roll of duct tape. My hands trembled as I jammed the key into the ignition, my heart racing so fast it drowned out the wind outside. The engine sputtered for a moment, and a wave of panic hit me. The masked figure stood in front of my car now, illuminated by the glow of the headlights, clutching the roll of duct tape. Behind him, the man from the doorway emerged, his face twisted with frustration. The engine roared to life, just as the masked figure took a step forward. I yanked the gear shift into reverse, tires spinning on the icy ground, and slammed on the gas. The car fishtailed wildly, but I managed to straighten it out, leaving the driveway in a spray of snow. In the rearview mirror, I saw them, both men standing at the edge of the driveway, watching me leave. Neither one tried to follow, as if this were all just some twisted game. Their silhouettes faded into the storm as I sped down the road, desperate to put as much distance between us as possible. The road was slick with ice. every turn a challenge. My heart pounded against my ribs, the adrenaline making my hands tremble on the steering wheel. The snowstorm thickened, reducing visibility to just a few feet in front of the car. But I couldn't slow down. I had to keep moving. Every time I glanced in the rearview mirror, I expected to see headlights following me. Even though the road remained empty, I couldn't shake the feeling that they were still out there, waiting for me to make a wrong turn or get stuck in the snow. The car skidded dangerously on a bend, the tires struggling to grip the icy surface. I gritted my teeth, forcing myself to focus. Every second counted. The idea of those men catching up to me, what they had planned, what they might have done, sent waves of fear through my entire body. At the next intersection, I blindly took a left, hoping the turn would bring me closer to town. The roads all looked the same under the snow, unfamiliar and disorienting. I just kept driving, hoping I was heading in the right direction. After what felt like hours, the glow of gas station lights appeared in the distance, cutting through the swirling snow like a beacon. Relief surged through me as I pulled into the lot, the tires crunching over fresh snow. I parked near the front entrance, engine still running, and slumped over the steering wheel, my breath ragged and shallow. For a long moment I just sat there, the warmth of the car heater slowly thawing my frozen limbs. My hands still trembled, and my heart refused to slow down. The reality of what had just happened hit me in waves. Those men had planned something bad. And I had almost fallen into their trap. I reached for my phone, fingers fumbling over the screen as I opened the delivery app. I quickly pulled up the order history and reported the address, typing as fast as my shaking hands would allow. I explained the strange behavior, the masked man, and the sense of danger I had felt the entire time. Moments later, a confirmation notification appeared. Address flagged. No future deliveries will be sent to this location. I exhaled a shaky breath, the weight on my chest lifting slightly. At least no one else would fall for that trap. At least not tonight. The snow continued to fall outside, swirling under the yellow lights of the gas station. I sat in my car, staring out at the quiet night, trying to steady my thoughts. I knew I should feel relieved that I got away, that I flagged the address in time. But instead, all I felt was unease. This wasn't just a random encounter. They had prepared for someone to show up, the specific instructions, the locked gate, the man's forced smile, the mask and duct tape. It was all planned. And if I hadn't followed my instincts, if I had stepped inside the house, I knew I wouldn't have made it out. The drive to the cabin took longer than I'd expected, winding roads stretching through dense forest with barely a sign of civilization. By the time I reached the remote Airbnb, it was already dark, the only light coming from the lanterns hanging on the porch. I parked my car on the gravel driveway, the crunch of the stones under the tires unnervingly loud in the quiet night. I stepped out into the cold, pulling my jacket tighter. The cabin stood small but inviting, with soft amber lights glowing from the windows and smoke drifting lazily from the chimney. It was supposed to be a romantic getaway for me and Sarah, my girlfriend, but she'd canceled last minute. Something about needing space. I didn't argue. It was Valentine's Day, and I wasn't going to let the trip go to waste. The host had been polite over the app, and the thoughtful touches in the cabin, chocolates, wine, and a cozy blanket near the fire, felt welcoming. On the kitchen table, I found a note written in neat handwriting. So glad you could make it. I hope you're not alone tonight. Happy Valentine's Day. I stared at the note for a moment. Something about it felt off, but I shook it off as an awkward attempt at being sweet. Maybe the host thought the handwritten message would add charm. I left the note on the counter and opened the wine, determined to unwind. The fire crackled warmly in the hearth, and I let the heat soak into me as I sank into the couch with a glass of wine. I was starting to feel relaxed for the first time all day. Just as I settled in, something caught my eye, the glint of another wine glass on the kitchen counter. I froze, frowning. The glass was half full, sitting next to the bottle I'd opened. I knew I hadn't poured a second glass. The sight of it sent a chill through me. I grabbed my phone and sent a message to the host, asking if someone else had been there earlier. The reply came back almost immediately. No, you should be alone. Nothing to worry about. I stared at the message, my stomach twisting. I tried to shake it off. Maybe the cleaning staff had left the glass there by mistake. I couldn't let paranoia ruin my night. I turned on the TV, flicking through channels mindlessly as I sipped my wine. But the uneasy feeling lingered, gnawing at the back of my mind. I forced myself to relax, chalking up the wine glass to a weird oversight. After finishing my glass, I got up to check the place out, trying to familiarize myself with the layout. The bathroom door was slightly ajar, and I noticed the shower curtain hanging halfway open. I could have sworn I'd pulled it shut earlier when I used the bathroom. Back in the living room, I saw the blanket I'd left neatly folded on the couch now rumpled, as if someone had sat there while I was in the other room. My pulse quickened. I glanced toward the door, checking the locks. Everything seemed secure. That's when I heard it. A faint creak. A soft, deliberate noise coming from the direction of the bedroom. My heart started to race, but I told myself it was nothing. Old cabins make sounds, right? But something about the noise didn't feel random. I stood there, rooted to the spot, listening for any other noise. The silence that followed was worse than the sound itself. I grabbed a knife from the kitchen, feeling the smooth steel cold in my hand. I told myself it was just to ease my nerves, but I couldn't deny the sense of dread creeping over me. With the knife in hand, I moved slowly toward the bedroom, each step deliberate and cautious. The lights flickered again, casting shifting shadows across the walls. The hallway felt longer than it should have, the tension in the air thick and oppressive. Just as I reached the bedroom door, the lights flickered one last time, then went out entirely. I was plunged into darkness. I held my breath, the silence pressing in around me. That's when I heard it. A soft laugh, quiet and close, coming from somewhere in the darkness. The sound of the laugh twisted my gut, making my skin crawl. It wasn't a casual chuckle. It was slow, deliberate, like whoever was out there wanted me to hear it. I gripped the knife tighter, willing my hands not to shake. Then my phone buzzed in my pocket, the vibration making me jolt. With trembling fingers, I pulled out my phone and unlocked the screen. There was a new message from the host. Enjoying the wine? I told you this night would be special. The words hit me like a punch to the chest. My stomach churned, and my heart pounded so hard it felt like it might burst. I knew without a doubt I wasn't alone in the cabin anymore. Before I could move, a figure emerged from the shadows of the bedroom, a mask covering their face, just enough light flickering from the fire to catch the edge of a twisted, eerie grin. I raised the knife, but my hand faltered. The figure didn't rush toward me. They tilted their head, as if savoring the fear they could sense radiating off me. The figure moved fast, hurling something at me, maybe a small log or a bottle. I barely registered what it was. I felt it smack against my arm, and the knife slipped from my grip, clattering to the ground. In the next second, the figure lunged at me. We crashed to the floor, and I fought like hell, thrashing under their weight, kicking and shoving with everything I had. My mind blurred with panic, every move a desperate attempt to survive. The masked figure was strong, relentless, and they clawed at me as if fueled by the thrill of the struggle. In a burst of adrenaline, I wriggled free and scrambled to my feet. I bolted for the hallway, stumbling as I heard the figure getting back up, heavy footsteps close behind. I reached the bathroom and slammed the door shut, locking it with trembling hands. The pounding on the other side of the door came immediately, making the hinges rattle. I knew I didn't have long. The bathroom window above the sink was small, barely big enough for me to squeeze through, but it was my only chance. I shoved the window open and climbed up, my muscles screaming from the effort. The pounding at the door grew louder, more frantic. Wood splintered as the figure threw their full weight against it. My hands slipped as I tried to haul myself through the narrow opening, but I kept going, ignoring the sharp scrape of the frame against my sides. Just as I wriggled through the last bit, I heard the bathroom door burst open behind me. I hit the ground outside with a heavy thud, the cold night air stinging against my skin. I scrambled to my feet and sprinted toward the car, every muscle in my body burning with fear and exhaustion. I could hear the maniac behind me, clambering through the broken bathroom window and landing with a thud of their own. Their heavy footfalls followed me, closing the distance with terrifying speed. The gravel crunched under my shoes as I reached the car, my fingers fumbling with the keys. The freezing air made my breath come in sharp gasps, but I didn't dare stop. I glanced back just once. The masked figure was right behind me, their mask gleaming in the faint moonlight, a silent threat in their relentless pursuit. I jammed the key into the lock, my hands shaking so badly I almost dropped it. The figure lunged just as I yanked the door open and threw myself inside, slamming the door shut behind me. They hit the window with a dull thud, their masked face pressed against the glass for a brief, horrifying second. I twisted the key in the ignition, and the engine roared to life. The figure pounded on the window, but I didn't wait to see what they'd do next. I threw the car into gear and tore out of the driveway, and the gravel spraying behind me as I sped down the narrow road. In the rearview mirror, I caught one last glimpse of the cabin shrinking in the distance. The figure stood in the driveway, watching me go, their head tilted in that same eerie way, as if they were satisfied. The air buzzed with excitement as I wandered through the crowded streets of the foreign city, itching to do something different. Tourist spots had never interested me, not the museums, the guided tours, or the historic landmarks. I wanted something raw, something off the beaten path, and the moment I found that post on a travel forum, I knew I'd found my adventure. The abandoned train station was buried beneath the city, hidden away and long forgotten. The instructions were vague. Follow the old tracks near the river, find the fence with the hole, and slip inside. It felt like a secret, one only a few brave explorers had dared to uncover. I followed the directions, the sounds of the bustling city fading behind me as I made my way down a narrow path by the river. Eventually, I found it, a section of rusted fence with a jagged tier. I ducked through the opening, my heart pounding in excitement. The station loomed ahead, dim and silent, an entrance to another world. I pulled out my phone and turned on the flashlight. It wasn't much, but it was enough to get started. Taking a deep breath, I stepped inside, the crunch of glass and debris beneath my feet, the only sound. I smiled to myself. This was exactly what I'd been looking for. The station felt like a time capsule, frozen in decay. Graffiti covered the walls, layers of spray paint overlapping in vibrant, chaotic patterns. Shattered tiles littered the ground, and the air smelled faintly of mildew and rust. I moved slowly through the space, shining my flashlight along the cracked walls and broken benches. As I explored further, the station opened up into a network of tunnels, branching off in every direction like a forgotten maze. It was thrilling. This place felt untouched, as if no one had set foot here in years. I pulled out my phone, snapping photo after photo, capturing the eerie beauty of the ruins. The further I went, the more the tunnels called to me, drawing me deeper into their twists and turns. The thrill of discovery buzzed through me, making every corner feel like the start of a new adventure. But then I noticed something unsettling. My GPS signal had vanished. I stared at my phone, watching as the map froze, the little blue dot refusing to move. I told myself it wasn't a big deal. I could find my way back. I just had to remember where I'd come from. The excitement that had fueled me began to wane as I wandered deeper into the tunnels. The air turned colder, and I noticed how quiet everything had become. My footsteps echoed oddly, the sound bouncing off the walls in ways that made the tunnels feel larger and more confined at the same time. Every corridor started to look the same. Graffiti-covered walls, crumbling bricks, the occasional broken light fixture. No matter how carefully I tried to retrace my steps, I couldn't find anything familiar. Panic started to bubble up inside me as I realized just how lost I was. Then, my flashlight flickered. The beam sputtered, dimming for a moment before regaining strength. I stared at the walls around me, and for a split second, I thought I saw a shadow shift, something moving just beyond the edge of the light. I whipped the beam in that direction, but there was nothing, just walls and darkness. I kept walking, my steps more cautious now, the weight of unease settling over me like a heavy blanket. That's when I saw it, a figure, barely visible in the dim light, standing at the far end of the tunnel. They wore a dark coat, the fabric blending with the shadows, and they moved silently through the corridor. Relief surged through me. Maybe it was another explorer, someone who could help me find my way out. "Hey!" I called, my voice echoing off the walls, but the figure didn't respond. They turned a corner and disappeared from view. I hurried after them, my heart racing, the beam of my flashlight bouncing wildly as I ran. But when I reached the corner, the tunnel was empty. No sign of anyone, just darkness stretching out ahead of me. I slowed my pace, trying to steady my breathing. My pulse pounded in my ears, but I told myself I just needed to stay calm. Maybe the figure had taken another turn, or maybe I'd imagined them all together. The tunnels did strange things with sound and shadows. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone. After what felt like hours of wandering, I stumbled upon a strange sight. A small makeshift camp deep within the tunnels. A stained sleeping bag lay crumpled on the ground, surrounded by empty cans of food. Nearby, a notebook sat open, its pages filled with scrawled handwriting. I picked it up, flipping through the pages. The notes were frantic, disorganized, as if written by someone teetering on the edge of sanity. Phrases like, "He's always watching," and "There's no way out," appeared again and again. I turned the page and froze at the sight of a single, chilling sentence. "He watches from the dark." A cold shiver ran through me. Whoever had written this must have been here recently. The cans were still relatively new. The sleeping bag looked recently used. But there was no one in sight, only the eerie silence of the tunnels. I dropped the notebook and bolted from the camp, every instinct telling me to run. My flashlight flickered erratically, and I shook it in frustration, desperate to keep the beam steady. The sound of my footsteps echoed through the tunnels, but I couldn't tell if the echoes were mine or someone else's. Then I heard it, the soft, deliberate sound of footsteps behind me. At first they were distant, barely noticeable, but with every passing second, they grew louder, more deliberate. Someone, or something, was following me. Panic surged through me, my lungs burning as I sprinted through the labyrinth of corridors. The tunnels twisted and turned without any sense, each corner leading me deeper into the maze. I couldn't stop. I couldn't think. All I could do was run, driven forward by the fear that whatever was behind me was closing the distance. The footsteps echoed in perfect rhythm with mine, matching my pace. Every time I glanced back, there was nothing, only darkness swallowing the tunnel behind me. But I knew something was there. I could feel it. My flashlight flickered again, and just as it dimmed, I spotted something ahead, a faint glint of metal. I strained to see through the fading light, and there it was, a ladder, bolted to the wall, leading upward. Hope surged through me, a desperate lifeline in the darkness. I sprinted toward the ladder, but before I could reach it, something flew through the air and struck my legs. I stumbled, hitting the ground hard, pain shooting through my knees and palms. I scrambled to my feet, my heart hammering in my chest as the sound of footsteps grew louder behind me. Without looking back, I threw myself at the ladder, my hands gripping the cold metal rungs. I climbed as fast as I could, every muscle in my body screaming in exhaustion. I could hear the footsteps closing in, faster now, and I knew I didn't have much time. Just as I pulled myself onto the ladder, I felt a brush of air behind me, as if someone had reached out, just inches away. The metallic clang of the rungs echoed in the tunnel as I climbed with everything I had. The ladder seemed to stretch on forever, but I forced myself to keep going, ignoring the burning in my arms and legs. Each step upward felt like a victory, pulling me closer to the surface. I could see a faint outline of light above, an exit, salvation. The sounds from below continued, fast, relentless footsteps climbing the ladder after me. I didn't dare look down. I focused on the light, on the promise of escape. With one final burst of strength, I reached the top and pushed the heavy grate aside. Cold night air hit my face, and I pulled myself out, collapsing onto the ground in an alleyway. I lay there for a moment, gasping for breath. The night sky above me, a welcome sight after the suffocating darkness of the tunnels. I rolled onto my side and glanced back down the ladder. The tunnel entrance gaped open, dark and silent. For a second, I thought I saw something. Movement. Maybe the shadow of a figure lingering just out of sight. But it was gone as quickly as it appeared, swallowed by the dark. I staggered to my feet, my entire body trembling with exhaustion. The city buzzed quietly around me, the normal sounds of life distant and surreal. I glanced down the alley one last time, half expecting to see someone emerge from the shadows, but the alley remained empty, as if nothing had ever been there. I took a deep breath and walked away, leaving the nightmare of the tunnels behind. This happened when I was a young woman of 22 years of age. I liked living alone. There was peace in solitude, a kind of comfort in knowing that at the end of the day it was just me and my space. My neighborhood was quiet, filled with friendly but distant people, just the way I preferred it. I didn't mind saying hello or sharing the occasional small talk, but I never let anyone too close. Mr. Daniels lived next door, and for as long as I could remember, he had always been eager to help. Too eager. He never crossed the line outright, but something about him unsettled me. If I brought in groceries, he was at the door, offering to lend a hand. If my trash bins were out too long, he'd roll them back without asking. It was annoying, but not enough to raise any alarms. That night, I was winding down with a book when the knock at the door startled me. I wasn't expecting anyone. I stood up slowly, making my way to the peephole. There he was, Mr. Daniels, standing on my porch with an awkward, almost sheepish expression. "I locked myself out," he said through the door. "Can I use your phone?" Every instinct told me to keep the door closed, but it felt rude, unreasonable even, to refuse a neighbor something so simple. I hesitated, my hand on the lock, debating what to do. Finally, I cracked the door just enough to pass the phone through. "Here," I said, extending my arm without opening the door fully. The moment his fingers brushed the phone, he shoved the door open with shocking force. I stumbled backward, my heart skipping a beat as he stepped inside, closing the door behind him. The friendly mask he always wore slipped away, replaced by something cold and dangerous. He grabbed my wrist, his grip tight and unyielding. "I just need to talk to you," he said, his voice low and unsettling, as if he had been waiting for this moment. A cold wave of fear washed over me. This wasn't an accident. He had planned this. I yanked my wrist free and stumbled back, nearly tripping over the edge of the rug. My pulse raced, and my mind screamed for me to run, but my legs felt heavy, weighed down by fear. Mr. Daniels followed me slowly, frustration flickering across his face as if he couldn't understand why I wasn't cooperating. Before I could react, he grabbed me again, both hands clamping down hard on my arm. He dragged me toward the door, his grip tightening with every step. I struggled, kicking and twisting, but his strength was overwhelming. Desperation took over. My hand shot out, grasping the glass vase on the table by the door. Without thinking, I swung it with all the force I could muster. The vase shattered against his head with a sharp crack, glass scattering across the floor. He staggered, clutching his head, but the blow only seemed to enrage him. His eyes darkened, and with a low growl, he lunged at me again. His hands latched onto my arm, and I felt his fingers dig into my skin as he tried to pull me toward the entrance. Panic flooded my body, making my movements frantic and uncoordinated. I kicked wildly, twisting my arm in every direction until, miraculously, I broke free from his grasp. I didn't think, I just ran. My feet pounded against the hardwood floor as I sprinted toward my bedroom, slamming the door shut behind me. I locked it with shaking hands, pressing my back against the wood as if that alone could keep him out. For a moment, everything was silent. Then the doorknob twisted, followed by a slow, deliberate knock. "Claire?" His voice was calm, almost coaxing. "Open the door. Let's just talk." My eyes darted to the window, the only way out. I threw it open, the cold night air rushing in. With one last glance at the door, I climbed onto the ledge and jumped. The cold air stung my skin as I landed hard on the ground, my knees scraping against the concrete. I ignored the pain and scrambled to my feet, heart pounding in my ears. I knew I couldn't stop. I had to get as far from the house as possible. I sprinted across the lawn, barefoot and gasping, my only thought being the neighbor's house at the end of the block. Every shadow felt like it was watching me, every sound like his footsteps closing in behind me. When I reached the porch, I slammed my fists against the door, gasping for breath. It swung open to reveal an older man, his wife peeking from behind him with wide eyes. "Please," I begged, tears welling in my eyes. "He's in my house. Call the police." They didn't hesitate. The man pulled me inside as his wife dialed the police, her voice steady and calm as she explained the situation. I slumped into a chair, trembling with exhaustion, still glancing nervously toward the door, convinced Mr. Daniels was lurking just outside. Blue and red lights flashed outside as officers arrived and swarmed my house. From the safety of the neighbor's porch, I watched them search every room, their flashlights sweeping across windows and through doorways. I held onto a blanket the neighbor had given me, my hands trembling with adrenaline and fear. The officers returned after what felt like an eternity, their expressions grim. "We didn't find anyone inside," one of them said. I shook my head, disbelief flooding my mind. He was there. He tried to. My words caught in my throat, the weight of what had happened overwhelming me. The officers assured me they would patrol the neighborhood for the rest of the night, but I knew staying in my house wasn't an option. The neighbors kindly let me stay with them, but even under their roof, every noise made me flinch. Every time I closed my eyes, I heard his voice, soft and coaxing. "Claire, open the door." Sleep was impossible. I lay awake, watching shadows stretch across the walls, feeling the weight of his presence still lingering, even though the police said he was gone. By morning, I knew I couldn't stay in that house another day. There was no comfort to be found within those walls anymore, no illusion of safety. The thought of returning, of walking through those same hallways where I'd fought for my life, made my skin crawl. I had to leave, immediately. I spent the day packing, tossing essentials into boxes and bags with trembling hands. The neighbors offered to help, but I refused, desperate to leave without delay. Every time I stepped outside, I felt exposed, as if Mr. Daniels were watching from some unseen corner, waiting for the moment I let my guard down. When the movers arrived, I hovered anxiously by the truck, urging them to hurry. I didn't care about organizing my things. I just needed to get away. As the last box was loaded, I climbed into my car and followed the truck out of the neighborhood without looking back. Relief washed over me as the familiar streets faded in the rearview mirror, but it was fleeting. Deep down, I knew the fear wouldn't vanish with distance. It had rooted itself inside me, and no amount of miles could erase it. Chapter 8: A Lingering Fear. The new apartment was far from my old neighborhood, smaller, quieter, tucked away on the edge of town. It was exactly what I'd hoped for, a fresh start. But settling in wasn't easy. Every creak of the floorboards made my heart race. Every knock on the door set me on edge, sending me to the peephole with my pulse hammering in my chest. Even the sight of strangers passing by my window filled me with unease, as if Mr. Daniels could be among them, lurking in the shadows. It started as the perfect day for a hike. Clear skies, crisp air, and the kind of quiet only the woods can provide. Claire and I had been talking about this trip for months, and now that we were finally here, I felt a rare sense of peace. The trail stretched ahead of us, winding gently through dense trees, and the occasional ray of sunlight warmed the path beneath our boots. It was exactly what I needed, an escape from the city's constant noise, the stress of work, and life's relentless demands. Claire walked behind me, her steps light and easy, trusting my lead. I had more hiking experience, so I took charge, guiding us deeper into the woods. At first, everything felt right. We laughed, took pictures, and shared stories we hadn't had time to tell each other in months. But as we made our way further down the trail, the forest around us began to shift. I started noticing little things, things that shouldn't have been there. A broken branch hanging awkwardly from a tree, as if something heavy had snapped it. Boot prints in the dirt that pointed in both directions, as if someone had paced back and forth along the path. And then there was the silence. At first I thought it was just the natural stillness of the forest, but it felt heavier than that. It pressed against my skin, making every sound Claire and I made seem too loud, too obvious. Something about the quiet unsettled me, though I didn't say anything to Claire. I told myself it was just nerves or my imagination running wild. But deep down I knew something wasn't right. The man came out of nowhere, materializing on the trail ahead like he had always been there, waiting. He looked ordinary enough, mid-30s, athletic build, a backpack slung over his shoulder. He smiled as he approached, greeting us with an easy, casual tone that felt too rehearsed. Claire returned the smile, but I kept my guard up. He asked us where we were headed, how far we planned to hike, and made a few jokes about the beauty of the forest. On the surface, there was nothing strange about him, but something in his eyes made my stomach turn. He was watching us too closely, like he was trying to memorize every detail. Then, as if reading my discomfort, he gave us a parting smile that didn't reach his eyes. "See you further down the trail," he said, and I felt the hair on the back of my neck stand on end. I didn't wait for Claire to say anything. As soon as the man walked away, I motioned for us to keep moving, faster this time. I told myself it was just paranoia. But the weight of his words, "See you further down the trail," followed us like a shadow. We hiked in silence for a while after the encounter, each lost in our own thoughts. The cheerful rhythm we had started with was gone, replaced by a growing tension. I kept glancing over my shoulder, expecting to see the man again, but the trail behind us remained empty. The deeper we went into the forest, the more unfamiliar everything seemed. The path we had followed so easily earlier now felt twisted and confusing. Trees leaned toward us like silent witnesses, and the air grew thick with the scent of damp earth and decaying leaves. I checked the map on my phone, but it made no sense anymore. Somehow we had lost the trail. Then we heard it, a soft crunch of leaves behind us, the unmistakable sound of footsteps. Claire's eyes met mine, wide with fear, and we both knew without saying a word. Someone was following us. We quickened our pace, trying to stay calm, but the footsteps behind us grew louder, more deliberate. Panic surged through me, and I grabbed Claire's arm, pulling her off the trail and into the dense underbrush. We crouched low, hearts pounding, hoping the thick foliage would hide us. But it was no use. The man from earlier stepped into view, his expression no longer friendly. His gaze was cold and predatory, and the smile he wore now was one of triumph. He had been waiting for this moment, savoring our fear. I could feel Claire trembling beside me as the man took a step closer, his eyes locked on mine. Just when I thought we had run out of options, a second figure emerged from the shadows, a man with sharp, calculating eyes and a rifle slung over his back. The shot rang out, sharp and deafening. The killer staggered, clutching his side, but didn't fall. The hunter's gaze shifted to us, unreadable and cold. "Run," he said flatly, like it was the only thing that mattered. And we did. We didn't think, we just ran. Branches lashed at our faces, roots snagged our boots, but we kept moving, driven by pure terror. The sound of the struggle between the two men echoed behind us, the groans of the wounded killer, the heavy steps of the hunter as he closed in. But I didn't dare turn around. Whatever was happening back there wasn't for us to witness. I could hear Claire struggling to keep up, her breath coming in ragged gasps, but neither of us stopped. There was no telling if the hunter was on our side or just another danger we'd been lucky enough to dodge. One thing was clear, he hadn't killed that man outright, and that left too many questions we didn't want answers to. We sprinted deeper into the forest, hoping against hope that we'd find the trail again. Every rustle in the bushes, every distant crack of a twig made my skin crawl. The forest was alive with things we couldn't see, and the farther we ran, the more it felt like it was closing in around us. Night was falling, and with it came a darkness that seemed to swallow everything whole. The dense canopy overhead blocked out the last slivers of light, leaving us to stumble blindly through the underbrush. My legs burned with exhaustion, and my lungs felt like they were on fire, but the fear wouldn't let me stop. I knew that if we slowed down, even for a second, something terrible would happen. Claire tripped over a root and hit the ground hard, a sharp cry escaping her lips. I yanked her back to her feet, urging her forward, though every step felt like wading through quicksand. The air was thick with the scent of damp wood, and the forest floor squelched underfoot, each step a reminder of how lost we were. For a moment, we paused, straining our ears for any sound of pursuit. All we heard was the rhythmic pounding of our hearts, a relentless reminder that we were still alive, for now. But the silence was worse than any noise. It meant the hunter was still out there, somewhere. I glanced up, hoping to see stars or any sign of the trail, but the darkness was absolute. We were completely on our own, two figures adrift in a sea of trees. I don't know how long we ran, minutes, hours, It all blurred together in a haze of fear and exhaustion. But at some point, as if by some cruel twist of fate, we found the trail again. The dirt path stretched out before us, uneven but unmistakable, and we collapsed onto it, gasping for breath. I pressed my hands against the cool ground, trying to steady myself. The path we'd longed for now felt like a thin thread of safety in a forest filled with hidden dangers. Claire curled up beside me, her arms wrapped around her knees, her breath shallow and shaky. We were both too drained to speak, too terrified to move. Even though we were back on the trail, the fear didn't leave us. Every shadow along the path seemed to shift and twist, as if something was lurking just beyond sight. The forest, once a place of peace and beauty, had become a living nightmare. And now that we had seen what was hiding within it, we knew we'd never feel safe here again. The sky began to lighten as dawn approached, casting a pale glow over the forest. But even as the morning crept in, the fear remained lodged deep in my chest. I glanced at Claire, and the look in her eyes told me she felt the same. We were safe, for now. But what we'd seen, what we'd escaped from, would follow us long after we left this place. We stood slowly, our legs trembling, and began walking along the trail. We didn't talk about what had happened. There were no words for it. The hunter's cold gaze, the killer's triumphant smile, the shot that echoed through the forest, it all blurred together in a way that made it feel unreal. But it had been real. Every terrifying second of it. When me, Marina, and my friend Lucas went camping, it was my first time away from the city. The air was crisp and cool as Lucas and I pitched the tent near the riverbank. The sunlight shimmered on the water's surface, and the sound of the flowing stream filled the air with a soothing rhythm. It was the kind of peace you only find deep in the wilderness, far away from cell signals, car horns, and crowded streets. For Lucas, this was a regular weekend escape. For me, it was unfamiliar territory, but I felt safe knowing he was here. We spent the first day hiking along the nearby trails. Lucas pointed out birds I couldn't name and showed me how to tell the direction by watching the shadows of trees. It was fun, more fun than I expected, and for a while I forgot my nervousness about being so far from civilization. When we returned to the campsite, Lucas built a fire, and we sat by the flames, roasting marshmallows as the sun dipped below the horizon. The warmth of the fire and the star-filled sky gave me a sense of calm, and I thought maybe I could get used to this after all. But as night deepened and the sounds of the forest grew louder, I felt a strange unease settle in the pit of my stomach. I told myself it was nothing, just the unfamiliar quiet of the wilderness. Lucas reassured me without even knowing it, his easy smile making me believe everything would be okay. I drifted off to sleep that night to the sound of the river flowing nearby, feeling safe in the knowledge that Lucas was right beside me. The next morning, we decided to explore a bit deeper into the forest. Lucas had spotted what looked like a trail branching off from the main path the day before, and curiosity got the better of us. We followed it through thick undergrowth, the ground soft beneath our boots, until we stumbled upon a small clearing hidden from view. It was there, nestled under a layer of branches and leaves, that we found the stash. At first glance, it looked like a random pile of backpacks and duffel bags, but the way everything was tucked away felt deliberate. Lucas opened one of the bags out of curiosity, and the moment he pulled back the zipper, we knew exactly what we were looking at. Drugs. Bags and bags of them, neatly packed, stacked like supplies for some sinister operation. My stomach twisted as Lucas quickly zipped the bag shut. We didn't need to discuss it. We both knew this was trouble. Before we could decide what to do, the sound of voices drifted through the trees. My heart leapt into my throat. Someone was coming. We barely had time to move before two men emerged from the trees. They were carrying rifles slung over their shoulders, their faces hard and alert. I pressed myself against a tree trunk, willing myself to be invisible, while Lucas crouched low beside me. The men scanned the clearing, their sharp eyes flicking from the bags to the ground. One of them knelt to check the stash, his hands moving with a practiced ease. The other paced around, his eyes scanning the forest like he could sense us hiding there. "Someone's been here," one of them muttered, pointing toward the footprints we had left near the riverbank. My heart pounded in my chest, loud enough that I was sure they could hear it. Lucas grabbed my arm gently, signaling for me to stay absolutely still. The traffickers exchanged a glance, and in that unspoken moment, we knew. Our presence hadn't gone unnoticed. We couldn't stay hidden for long. The moment the traffickers moved toward the river, Lucas whispered for me to run. We bolted through the underbrush, not caring about the noise we made. Survival was the only thing on our minds. Branches scratched at my skin as we sprinted deeper into the forest. I could hear the men shouting behind us, their voices growing louder with each passing second. My legs burned with the effort, but I didn't dare slow down. Then I tripped, my foot catching on a hidden root. I hit the ground hard, the air knocked out of my lungs. Panic surged through me as I scrambled to my feet, but the moment I looked up, Lucas was already there, hauling me upright with a fierce grip. "Come on," he whispered urgently, dragging me forward. But the delay had cost us. The voices of the traffickers were closer now, too close. We needed to disappear, and fast. Lucas yanked me toward the river, and I realized his plan the moment my feet touched the icy water. The cold was a shock, sharp and unforgiving, instantly seeping into my bones. I gasped, but Lucas tightened his grip on my arm, pulling me further into the current. There was no time to think about the cold. If the traffickers found us, freezing would be the least of our problems. We waded deeper, moving under an overhang of rocks that jutted out just enough to offer some cover. The current tugged at my legs, threatening to pull me under, but Lucas held on, steady and sure. We crouched low, the water swirling around our waists as the voices of the traffickers grew louder. Flashlights swept across the riverbank, beams of light cutting through the darkness. I held my breath, every muscle in my body screaming to move, to run. But we stayed still, frozen beneath the overhang as the traffickers scoured the riverbank. One of them muttered something I couldn't hear, and for a moment the flashlight beam hovered dangerously close to our hiding spot. Then, just as quickly as they had come, the lights swung away. The voices faded, swallowed by the sounds of the river and the forest beyond. We stayed crouched beneath the overhang for what felt like an eternity, waiting to be sure they were gone. Only when the night was silent again did Lucas pull me upright, his face pale with cold but determined. We stumbled out of the river, our clothes soaked and heavy. The cold was relentless, wrapping around us like a second skin. My teeth chattered uncontrollably, and I could feel the edges of panic creeping in again, this time not from fear, but from the brutal chill settling into my limbs. Lucas gripped my arm, his voice low but urgent. "We have to keep moving." I nodded, too cold to respond, and we pressed forward into the forest. The night felt endless, every shadow stretching longer and darker as the hours dragged on. Our wet clothes clung to our bodies, sapping what little warmth we had left. Each step was harder than the last, the forest floor uneven and treacherous beneath our feet. I tripped more than once, catching myself on tree trunks and branches, but I kept moving. Stopping wasn't an option, not here, not now. The ranger station was our only hope. Somewhere in the dark, miles away, was safety. All we had to do was get there before the traffickers found us again. The thought kept me going, even as exhaustion pulled at my every step. When we finally reached the ranger station, I almost cried with relief. The building was small, nestled among the trees, with a faint light glowing in the window. We stumbled toward it, shivering and exhausted, and Lucas banged on the door with the last of his strength. A ranger opened the door, his expression shifting from annoyance to concern the moment he saw us. He helped us inside, guiding us to a pair of chairs near a heater. The warmth was a blessing, but it did little to shake the fear that still clung to me like a shadow. We told the ranger everything, about the stash, the traffickers, the chase through the forest. He listened carefully, his brow furrowed with concern. When we were finished, he exchanged a glance with another ranger standing nearby. They didn't say much, but their expressions told me they believed us. "We'll take you back to your camp," the ranger said finally. "Get your things, then we'll make sure you're safe." His words were meant to be reassuring, but they didn't erase the unease settling in my gut. The forest had already proven it could hide dangers far worse than I could imagine. We rode back to the campsite in the ranger's truck, the headlights cutting through the dark forest. When we arrived, The camp was exactly as we had left it, except for one unsettling detail. The stash we had discovered earlier was gone. There were no duffel bags, no backpacks, no signs of the traffickers we had seen just hours before. The only thing left was a patch of disturbed earth where the bags had been buried. I scanned the area, my heart pounding, but the forest was silent. Too silent. The rangers helped us gather our things, but the sense of unease lingered. I kept expecting to see a figure lurking in the shadows, waiting to strike. But the forest remained empty, offering no answers to the questions swirling in my mind. As we packed up, the rangers tried to reassure us, saying the traffickers were probably long gone. But I knew better. They hadn't just disappeared. They were out there, somewhere, hidden by the same forest that had nearly swallowed us whole. We left the campsite in silence, the weight of the night's events pressing down on us. The forest was quiet, too quiet, as I ventured deeper along the overgrown path. I'd heard stories about the hut hidden somewhere in these woods. Rumors of its existence passed between hikers and photographers like folklore. Most people dismissed it as an urban legend, but the thought of discovering it, capturing photos no one else had, was irresistible. I knew the risks. People said the woods were dangerous, that strange things happened beyond the marked trails. But I pushed those warnings aside. Adventure demanded risk, didn't it? The trees grew thicker with every step, the sky above swallowed by a dense canopy of leaves. The air felt heavy, as though the forest was holding its breath. My phone lost signal hours ago, but I pressed on, following my instincts deeper into the unknown. The peaceful sounds of birds and rustling leaves faded, replaced by an unsettling silence that wrapped around me like a blanket. I kept going, determined to find the hut and prove that the rumors were real. What started as an exciting challenge now felt like a looming threat, but I was too deep in to turn back. After hours of hiking, I found it, the hut. It looked as though it had been swallowed by time, its wooden walls rotting and covered in thick moss. Bones, too many to count, were scattered around the clearing. Some snapped in half, others piled in disturbing arrangements. A chill ran through me, but I was too captivated to leave. I approached cautiously, my boots crunching over brittle twigs and bones. Inside, the air was musty and stale, reeking of damp wood and decay. The room was filled with strange objects. Rusted tools, frayed ropes, and bones carefully placed in bizarre, deliberate patterns. Some were strung up on cords, swaying gently as if moved by an invisible hand. It was like stepping into a nightmare. Despite the unease prickling at my skin, I pulled out my camera. I knew I had to capture this. No one would believe me otherwise. The lens clicked as I took shot after shot, each image more surreal than the last. The forest's strange beauty blurred with the unsettling horror of what lay before me. I raised my camera to take another photo, framing the light filtering through a gap in the decaying wall. Just as I pressed the shutter, a soft, breathy chuckle drifted through the air behind me. My heart skipped a beat, and I spun around. He was standing in the doorway, blocking my exit. A gaunt man with sunken cheeks and wild, gleaming eyes that shone with twisted delight. His clothes were tattered, hanging off his thin frame like rags. But it was his grin that froze me in place. A grin that stretched too wide, filled with an unnatural joy. "You shouldn't have come here," he whispered, his voice a raspy hiss that sent a wave of cold fear washing over me. His grin widened as he took a step forward, and then he lunged. Instinct took over, and I bolted out of the hut, my heart hammering in my chest. Branches whipped against my arms and face, leaving stinging welts, but I didn't stop. The madman's footsteps pounded behind me, relentless and eager, as if he was enjoying the hunt. The forest, once serene and calming, now twisted around me, becoming a suffocating maze. Every direction looked the same, and panic clouded my thoughts. I forced myself to keep running, but the madman was fast, too fast. His heavy breathing and the crunch of leaves underfoot told me he was close, closer than I wanted to believe. I stumbled over a root, my ankle twisting painfully as I hit the ground hard. Gasping for air, I tried to scramble to my feet, but the madman was already upon me, looming over me with that same wide grin. His eyes sparkled with wicked amusement as he reached for me. his fingers curling like claws. In a last-ditch effort, I grabbed a fallen branch beside me and swung it with every ounce of strength I had. The wood connected with a sickening thud, and the madman staggered back, stunned. I didn't wait to see if he'd recover. I forced myself upright and ran, adrenaline flooding my veins as I plunged deeper into the forest. My legs burned as I forced them to move, each step feeling heavier than the last. The forest blurred around me, twisting and darkening, the trees pressing in like walls. I could hear him behind me, crashing through the underbrush, his breathless giggle cutting through the night air. Every time I thought I'd gained distance, his footsteps grew louder, closer, and more confident, like he knew the forest would always lead me back to him. The cold air sliced through my lungs, but I didn't dare stop. I stumbled again, catching myself just before hitting the ground, but it cost me precious seconds. His voice, soft and gleeful, echoed from behind the trees. "You won't get far," he whispered, his words carried on the wind like a promise. I pushed forward, ignoring the ache in my muscles, the stinging cuts on my arms. The forest was endless, the path winding in circles. Every part of me screamed for rest, but I knew that stopping would be the end. Somewhere not far away, Sam was on patrol, sweeping his flashlight across the dense forest floor. The nights here were usually quiet, marked only by the rustling of leaves and distant animal calls. But tonight was different. As he made his way along the trail, the faint sound of a scream cut through the night air, distant but unmistakable. He froze, heart pounding, listening for another sound. And then he heard it, another scream, followed by the snapping of branches and frantic footsteps. Someone was out there, running for their life. Without a second thought, Sam tightened his grip on his flashlight and sprinted toward the sound, his boots thudding against the dirt. His hand hovered near his gun as he ran, a growing sense of dread tightening in his chest. Whoever was out there was in serious trouble, and he had no idea how much time he had to stop it. The trees thinned as I stumbled toward a small clearing, my legs barely holding me upright. My breath came in ragged gasps, and my vision blurred with exhaustion. But just as I reached the clearing's edge, I felt a weight slam into my back, knocking me to the ground. The madman pinned me down, his bony fingers digging into my wrists as his grin stretched wide in the pale moonlight. "Got you," he whispered, his breath hot against my face. I struggled beneath him, panic surging through me like wildfire, but his grip was iron tight. Just when I thought it was over, a brilliant beam of light cut through the darkness, blinding both of us. "Get away from her!" a voice bellowed, steady and commanding. I twisted my head toward the source and saw him, Sam, the ranger, standing at the edge of the clearing with his gun raised. The madman hesitated, his grin faltering for the first time. It was all the time I needed. I drove my knee into his ribs with every ounce of strength I had, and his breath hitched in a pained gasp. His grip loosened just enough for me to pull free and scramble toward Sam, my hands shaking. Sam fired a warning shot into the air, the sound cracking through the night like a whip. The madman's expression twisted into something unrateable, half fury, half delight. With one last cackle that echoed through the trees, he turned and vanished into the forest, swallowed whole by the darkness. Sam lowered his gun and placed a steady hand on my shoulder. "You're safe now," he said, but his words didn't match the unease still coiled in my chest. I nodded, breathless, my heart still racing from the encounter. We didn't linger in the clearing. Sam led me back toward the trail, keeping a hand on my arm to steady me as we walked through the dense forest. I could feel the cold creeping in, but it didn't compare to the chill that had taken root in my mind. I was safe, but the knowledge that the madman was still out there gnawed at me. By the time we reached the trailhead, the first light of dawn was creeping over the horizon. Sam escorted me to my car, his eyes scanning the forest as if expecting the madman to appear again. But the woods remained silent, shrouded in a heavy stillness that felt far from reassuring.